A reading before the sermon from M.J. Kaiser at Enfleshed. Maybe we try something queerer this year, far more strange. Not mere counter resolutions, but odder intentions altogether. Ones that disturb predictable patterns, problematize all the collective routines that keep us in destructive loops year after year. Let us toss out colonizing life maps of our bodies, lives, and lands, histories, and futures. Choose to wander in weirder directions. Give up the old, tired scripts. Speak in tongues of flesh, squawks and grunts and howls and moans, ancient animal utterances bubbling up from within. Angry and tired, hopeful and alive, language unintelligible to all deadening rationality. Yes, it is a peculiar suggestion, but normal is severing us from our humanity. Success is destroying life on the planet. Hustle is running us into the ground. The last thing we need is more winners at this game. Let us be people who strive to fail the tests of domination, companioning each other in the consequences of non-conformity and unearthing the joy of a more feral way. This year, may we trust in the wisdom of the fierce, free, and freaky, too creative to be contained, too bizarre to fit standard molds of exploitation, too unusual to lead us toward the familiar dead ends. Cheers to a year of unhinged dreaming, absurd acts of solidarity and care, and utterly foolish faith in the mysterious love of a wild world that desperately wants us to live. Tomorrow, if you don't know, is Epiphany. It's a day celebrated in a variety of ways in some Christian traditions and marks two occasions. The second being Jesus' baptism and the revelation of the Holy Ghost or Spirit and the sound of God's own voice speaking affirmation. Epiphany's other meaning is also marking the end of the 12 days of Christmas, when the three wise men, also sometimes referred to as three kings, finally reach the baby Jesus. And while neither of these is particularly of interest to UUs in general, because it's not really our theology, there are always lessons and wisdom to be gleaned from all sources. I have been reflecting a lot again lately on the choice of the three wise men to return home by a different way. This was not an easy, casual choice like, which book do I read next, or what do we have for dinner? It's a major act of resistance. We might even say civil disobedience on their part. King Herod had solicited them to be his emissaries and was expecting them to return so that he could learn who this newborn was, who would one day be king. They didn't know, but his plan was to have the baby killed. Their decision not to return to Jerusalem with that information led Herod to mandate the execution of every male child to and under in the vicinity of Bethlehem instead, often referred to as the slaughter of the innocents. The wise men knew that their decision would have grave consequences, and still they made that hard decision and did what their consciences told them to do. I keep wondering about the hard choices that we have to make, the ones we suspect are coming, and whether we decide to do the hard things we know to be right, to be better, to be true. We have that same feeling in our guts that the wise men had, that something isn't right, even like something deeply dangerous being out there on the horizon. When given the opportunity, the option, the choice, which road will we take? Will we choose love? Love is patient, love is kind, wrote Paul to the Corinthians, a community of Christians becoming. This passage is used often in weddings and other events as expressions of personal love. But it was written in the context of a district pastor to a group of people where disunity was starting to form. This is Paul saying, "Stop treating each other so badly and disrespecting God." And somewhat followed with, "Don't make me come out there right now." Instead, he offers them, just follow these 15 easy steps to understanding what love is. Especially when the passage is trimmed down this way, we get this idea that love is something beautiful and generous and soft and endlessly forgiving. The thing is that that kind of love can not only be boring and wishy-washy, but it's not the kind of love that actual human people living their lives in this wild world need. Love should be all of those things, but also more. It should call us to be our better selves, to hold us accountable when we mess up, to help us return to covenant, to remind us of the depths of our humanity. Love asks us to choose a different road. And this is how we get to a show I've been hooked on called The Bear, which is streaming on Hulu. The show is set in Chicago in a sandwich shop called The Beef. It's a family business bought by a man who died years ago and passed down to his older son, Mikey, who unfortunately has also now died. Mikey had a crew that became family to each other, which includes both big love and big dysfunction. Mikey's best friend, Richie, has been running the place until the new owner, the younger brother, Carmi, can take over. The place is not in great shape. We learn that the books are a mess. The physical building has not been cared for properly. They end up getting shut down. They owe a bunch of money to Carmi and Mikey's uncle. They hadn't been paying their vendors. Evidently, while the pandemic was really terrible, Richie was selling drugs on the side to keep the place open, literally in the alley at the side of the restaurant. We can say it. It is not good. So all of that, and now every one of these characters is grieving on top of it. And now they are also hugely stressed at the shop being closed, needing to do work on it to get it reopened, the question of whether they'll even have jobs, and so on. And then there's the people. The crew insults each other, talks smack, but sometimes just with meanness. They mock Carmi, who, by the way, was the top chef at the #1 restaurant in the world, but is younger than many of the staff, so they treat him like he doesn't know how to tie his own shoelaces. They are disrespectful of property. Friends of mine have referred to the setting as toxic, and that is a fair assessment. And still, Carmi wants to make something new. He wants to take a different road. We get flashbacks of his time in that #1 restaurant, and it is terrible. Having someone literally standing over your shoulder and constantly berating you. Carmi wants to do better and to be better, even though this is what he knows. The changes are small but intentional. Carmi calls all of them chef as an expression of respect. Tina always mocks him by calling everyone Jeff. He verbalizes his movement through the kitchen for safety. Behind and corner gets said a lot. The crew resists. They didn't sign up for this. They don't want it. They like how they already do things. They put the fun in dysfunctional. They bicker and fight. So much swearing. They throw tantrums. They're childish. It's like watching people consistently acting from their least best selves all of the time. I want to be clear that there are no heroes in this show. These are all deeply flawed people. It's one thing that critics have really liked about it. Every single character is a bit of a mess. Kind of real. They have strengths and they have weaknesses. But Carmi persists. He wants to fix the place. That's what he says a number of times. He's going to fix it, like how he couldn't fix his brother, like how he couldn't save his brother. But they had had this dream of opening a place together someday, and Carmi is still committed to making that dream real, to memorialize his brother. The change starts slow, and not one of these people would say that love is the driving force. Honestly, I'm pretty sure that people think I'm a little unbalanced to say that love is unfolding in this show, but I promise it's there. Like this one time early on, Carmi decides to make a huge change in the way to do things. Sydney tells him it's a terrible idea. He does it anyway and tells Sydney that she's in charge. As Sydney is explaining what they're going to do with the staff and dealing with their resistance, Carmi just announces he's leaving and will be back and walks out. When he returns, Sydney calls him on his behavior, says he's not listening and that they need to do things differently. It takes a minute, but Carmi finally hears her and apologizes for walking out. They begin to talk about what she needs, and Carmi says he'll do better. They are committed to trying to find another way, a different road than the one that they both traveled on to get there. Another time, Tina messes up a dish that she's been working on. Sydney replaces the dish with a fresh one while Tina is cleaning up. While Sydney, she asks Sydney, why would she do that? She's been so mean. Sydney basically replies that they don't have time for games, and she softens. That is it. They're on the same team. They're supposed to be in this thing together. They literally can't do it without each other. They have a shared mission, a shared purpose, and Sydney, like Carmi, is trying to do her best to keep focused on that, even with the crew acting badly. What Mikey's staff don't realize is not only how difficult this can be, but how difficult it is to resist the treatment they experienced as they were being trained and not repeating it. And while Sydney is actually really good with people, Carmi's interpersonal skills would rate adequate at best most days. But Carmi begins to win people over with his culinary skills, with his system, which allows them to move better and more safely, with changes they start to try to make the whole business more sustainable, his ability to see the bigger picture, and with his care. Despite his shortcomings, Carmi also practices respect a lot. This is one way that he expresses his love. Respect for the other people that he works with. Respect for the work they do. Respect for the process. Respect for the place and the tools. Respect for the history. Respect for the customers and community. Respect for the possibilities. And things begin to shift. Tina realizes how much better she's doing in the few months since Carmi has arrived. She's faster, smarter, more together in her work. She begins to see possibility for something more, something different. Not because she didn't love what was with Mikey, but because things are different now, and it has given her permission to think and dream. She's taking pride in herself and her work. Carmi is operating from a place of seeing a bigger picture than most of the rest of the staff understand. Although many of them act like they're being punished when he asks them to do things, he's actually asking them to do better, to work at a higher level than they had become accustomed to, which in turn will make the whole place better. Carmi and Sydney are trying to make something beautiful. I read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown not long before I started watching the show, and I could see her principles and ideas playing out. Brown is a liberation facilitator who draws some of her thoughts from nature. For example, she writes of birds answering their innate call to migrate. There is an art to flocking, staying separate enough not to crowd each other, aligned enough to maintain a shared direction, and cohesive enough to always move toward each other. Her core principles for emergent strategy are: small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant. Be like water. There is always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Have it. Never a failure, always a lesson. Trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resiliency by building the relationships. Less prep, more presence. And what you pay attention to grows. We see all of these in the show. The staff that continues during the transition from one brother to the other are committed to the place, and this makes buy-in possible as they move through the dramatic changes needed. Change is constant. Every last one of these people makes mistakes. They blow up, they talk back, they sabotage each other. But in the end, focus on the business reminds them of why they're there. Never a failure, always a lesson. What you pay attention to grows. People respond better when you come from a place of wanting to be in relationship with them instead of wanting to be in hierarchy or having power over them. Focus on critical connections. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Carmi and Sydney trust that the staff they work with have skills. They want to help grow them. Trust the people. Less prep, more presence. Brown writes, emergence shows us that adaptation and evolution depend more upon critical, deep, and authentic connections, a thread that can be tugged for support and resilience, the quality of connection between the nodes and the patterns. Dare I say, love. Undoubtedly, one of the reasons I appreciate emergent strategy so much is because it's the same approach as Alfred North Whitehead's process relational philosophy. That is, that we are all parts of the whole, and the whole moves and changes as we move and change. And we move and change in relationship with each other. This is one of my core frameworks for understanding the world and our faith within it. We are still sort of riding the wave of Christmas and New Year's a little, reminded that love is born in the places it's needed most. Every single character in this show is dealing with difficulties and challenges in their lives, pains and sadnesses, added into the mix of having a boss who took his own life and the wild changes their workplace is experiencing. They are all hurting. And as they work at trying to take a different road, love still starts coming through the cracks. And I know it's a TV show, and to some extent there's supposed to be some kind of goodness happening. But in season 1, it's hard to find for a while if you're looking just at the state of things. When you watch closely, though, that change is happening. Love is unfolding and beginning to liberate each of them to make something more, something beautiful, something different, some other way possible, to make more love possible. May we be willing to look for the cracks where we can plant seeds to nurture into something we love and invite us to live wild, wonderful, freer, fiercer lives.